The sound of my phone, hitting the polished boardroom. Floor was like a gunshot in the middle of a funeral. Everyone froze. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. The CEO at the head of the long glass table. The executives in their tailored suits, even the intern standing stiffly against the wall. For a moment, the entire room seemed to breathe in unison, holding itself still, waiting for what came next. I reached down slowly, my fingers brushing the cold device, but not out of panic, because in truth, I hadn't dropped it by mistake. I had let it slip deliberately, and the shockwaves that followed were exactly what I wanted. The CEO's eyes flickered, sharp and calculating, but it was my boss's reaction that caught me. That smirk, that quick, wicked little smile that stretched across his face like he'd been waiting years for this exact moment. He leaned back in his chair, confidence pouring off him, and said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's always careless. I've warned her about this before. Honestly, I don't think she's cut out for executive-level work." The CEO didn't respond, just stared at me with a look I couldn't read. But my boss's smirk only grew. He thought he had me cornered. He thought this was his chance to crush me in, front of the one man whose approval controlled everything in this company. The meeting ended shortly after, but not before I felt the weight of my boss's hand on my shoulder as he whispered, "Pack your things. You're finished here." His words were poisoned honey, smooth yet deadly. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I simply walked to his office, placed my phone on his desk, and turned without a word. His brows furrowed in confusion, just for a second, but he quickly brushed it off, too busy reveling in his own victory to question why I had left the phone behind. But what he didn't know was that my mistake had been no accident at all, because inside that phone were recordings of him shouting at employees, twisting the truth, manipulating numbers, and giving instructions that could sink this company in seconds if exposed. Every cruel remark, every illegal order, every hidden agenda. The phone wasn't just a device, it was a trap. And I had just placed it in the one place it needed to be. He thought he'd won. He thought firing me was the end of my story. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of his downfall. Because while he laughed at the thought of me being humiliated, while he envisioned me packing boxes in shame, the CEO was the one now staring at the glowing notifications on my unlocked screen. The CEO was the one who pressed play on the first recording. And the CEO was the one who would soon realize that the man he trusted most was the very one plotting the company's ruin. And as I walked down that hallway for the last time, my badge still clipped to my blazer, I didn't feel the crushing weight of defeat. I felt power, because I knew, before the day was over, my boss wouldn't just lose me. He would lose everything. The hallway outside the boardroom felt colder than usual, every step echoing like a drumbeat of change. I could hear faint laughter behind the glass walls. My boss's voice, smug and triumphant, already relishing the story he'd spin about, finally getting rid of the weak link. But I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because I knew something he didn't. On his desk, my iPhone sat glowing faintly with each new notification. And buried inside that device were weeks' worth of secrets. His secrets. Late-night calls where he ordered me to rewrite reports so the numbers looked more profitable. Voice memos where he bragged about siphoning funds into accounts that weren't traceable. Even casual conversations where his arrogance spilled over, mocking the very CEO he pretended to serve. I had spent months pressing record. Every insult, every threat, every reckless demand. It all lived inside that small silver device. And now, without realizing it, he was in possession of the very evidence that would destroy him. As I packed my few belongings into a cardboard box, colleagues walked by, some with pity in their eyes, others with the smug satisfaction of vultures circling the wounded. No one asked questions. No one offered help. That's the thing about corporate offices. The second you're marked as disposable, you're already dead to them. But they didn't know that the funeral they were preparing wasn't mine. It was his. I could almost picture it. The CEO in his private office. Curiosity piqued, tapping open the voice memos app. I had even renamed the files with dates and titles. Subtle enough not to be obvious, but organized enough for a sharp mind to notice. And the CEO was nothing if not sharp. He wasn't a man who trusted blindly. If there was even a whisper of betrayal, he would dig until he found the bones buried deep. I slipped out of the building quietly, carrying nothing but my box and a calmness I hadn't felt in months. Outside, the city buzzed, cars honking, people rushing, but for me, the world had slowed. I had pulled the first thread, and soon, The entire fabric of my boss's empire would unravel. Hours passed. I sat in a cafe across the street, sipping bitter coffee, my box of office belongings on the chair beside me. From that window, I could see the top floors of the building where I had once worked. The light in the CEO's office was still on, and though I couldn't hear it, I knew. He was listening. My phone was no longer mine, but that was the plan. What mattered was what it contained, and sooner or later, the truth inside it would surface. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, my own phone buzzed, a different device I kept hidden, the one my boss didn't know existed. An unknown number, I answered. The voice on the other end was low, deliberate. "I've heard some interesting recordings today," the CEO said. My breath caught, but I didn't speak. I didn't need to, because the pause that followed told me everything. He was no longer questioning if my boss was guilty. He was deciding what to do with the proof. "Come to my office tomorrow morning," he said finally. "Don't tell anyone you're coming. Not even him." The line went dead. I sat frozen, the weight of his words pressing into me. This was it, the moment I had been building toward for months. But with it came a new kind of danger. Because if my boss even suspected I had played a part in this, his revenge would be merciless. And so I sat there in the fading light, staring at the glowing tower across the street, knowing that tomorrow wouldn't just decide my future. It would decide his destruction. But what I didn't know then was that my boss wasn't the kind of man to go down quietly, and the games he was about to play would drag me deeper into the shadows than I had ever imagined. The next morning I walked into the building like a ghost. No ID badge, no desk, no official place to belong, and yet my steps carried me higher and higher until I reached the top floor, the place where only the most trusted employees ever set foot. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me, as if I were an intruder in sacred territory. But before she could speak, the CEO's voice carried from his office, "Send her in." The door clicked shut behind me, sealing me into a room lined with glass, steel, and silence. The CEO sat at his desk, not looking at me at first. Instead, he held my iPhone in his hand, turning it over like a weapon he wasn't sure how to wield. The screen glowed faintly, revealing the folder I had left open. "Do you know what this is?" he asked finally, his voice calm but laced with something dangerous. "Yes," I said. My tone was steady, though my pulse hammered in my throat. "You dropped it yesterday," he continued, "in front of me. In front of your boss. At first I thought it was an accident, but then I listened." He leaned back, eyes narrowing, and tapped the screen. From across the desk I heard it, my boss's voice dripping with arrogance. "If the CEO knew how much money I was funneling out of the budget, he'd have me killed. But he's too blind to see it. They all are. That's why I'll always be 3 steps ahead." The CEO paused the playback, his expression unreadable. "You've been recording him," he said. I swallowed hard. "Yes." "Why?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "Why indeed? For revenge? For survival? For truth?" "I was tired of being his pawn," I said finally. "Tired of watching him sabotage the company while making everyone else take the blame. I had to protect myself. And someone needed to know the truth." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the faint hum of the city below. Then slowly the CEO set the phone down. "You understand," he said. "This information could destroy him. But it could also destroy you. If he finds out you recorded him, if he even suspects, you won't be safe. Not in this company. Not anywhere." My throat tightened. He was right. But before I could respond, the CEO's expression shifted, hard, calculating, the look of a man who had already started moving pieces on a chessboard. "You'll leave the building now," he instructed, his tone low and deliberate. "You'll go about your life as if nothing has changed. But when I call you again, you'll come. Do you understand?" I nodded, though unease churned inside me. Because while his words promised strategy, his eyes told another story. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about using me. As I stepped out of his office, I caught sight of my boss down the hall. His laughter filled the corridor, his hand clapping the back of another executive. But the moment his gaze landed on me, his expression sharpened. Like a predator catching the scent of something unfamiliar, I lowered my eyes and walked past, heart pounding. But I knew he had noticed. He had felt it, that subtle shift in the air when power begins to tilt. That night, as I sat in my apartment staring out at the glowing city, my phone buzzed. This time it wasn't the CEO. It was an unknown message. 4 words, no name, no number. I know what you did. My blood ran cold. Because that wasn't from the CEO. That was from him. The message glowed on my screen like a dagger pressed against my throat. I know what you did. 4 words, sharp enough to slice through the quiet of my apartment. My hand trembled as I set the phone down, but inside my mind raced. How could he know? Had the CEO tipped him off? Had someone overheard? Or worse? Had he already listened to the very recordings meant to end him? Sleep didn't come that night. I sat by the window, watching headlights crawl across the streets below, every shadow outside my building suddenly suspicious. And when morning came, I wasn't surprised to find an email waiting for me, one that made my chest tighten. Lunch today, my treat. We need to talk. No signature. No details. Just a meeting place. And yet I knew exactly who it was from. By noon, I was sitting across from him in a quiet restaurant tucked away on a side street. He arrived late, as he always did, the kind of man who treated punctuality as beneath him. When he finally slid into the booth across from me, his smile was wide but hollow. Well, well, he said smoothly, folding his hands. Out of work already? What a shame. I didn't respond. I just stared, waiting, because I knew he hadn't invited me here to mock me. Not really. His smile flickered just for a moment, as his eyes searched mine. You've been busy, he said finally. Too busy. And you've been talking to people you shouldn't be talking to. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I don't know what you're talking about, I said evenly, though my voice nearly cracked. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Don't play dumb with me. You think I don't notice? The CEO has been distant. Different. And it started after your little performance with the phone. The air between us tightened. The noise of the restaurant fading until it was just the two of us, locked in a silent duel. Then, leaning forward, his smile dropped altogether. If you ever try to cross me, he whispered, you won't just lose your job. You'll lose everything. Career, reputation, friends, even your safety. Understand? I forced myself not to flinch, not to blink. Are you threatening me? I asked, my voice low. He leaned back, smiling again, as if the threat had been a passing joke. Of course not, just friendly advice. The rest of the meal passed in silence, every bite tasting like ash in my mouth. When we finally parted ways, I walked out into the sunlight, my skin crawling with the realization that he knew, maybe not everything, but enough. And yet, as the city bustled around me, my phone buzzed again. This time it was the CEO, a single line of text. He's panicking. Keep calm. I stared at the words, torn between fear and determination. Because if my boss was panicking, it meant the recordings were working. But panic made men dangerous. And I knew it was only a matter of time before he stopped playing games and started drawing blood. That night I checked my door twice, locked my windows, and sat awake with the lights on. Because the battle was no longer about a job. It wasn't even about the company. It was about survival. And the war had only just begun. The following morning, the CEO's summons came without warning. A sleek black car waited outside my apartment, the kind of vehicle that drew too many stares on a quiet street. The driver said nothing as I slid into the back seat, the tinted windows swallowing the outside world whole. When we reached the building, I was led not to the boardroom or his office, but to a smaller private chamber I'd never seen before. The CEO sat at the far end of a polished table, the phone lying in front of him like an artifact pulled from the ruins of war. You've put me in a dangerous position, he said without preamble. My heart sank. He raised a hand, silencing me. Don't misunderstand. I'm not angry. In fact, I'm intrigued. You've done something very few dare to do. You've gathered evidence. Not gossip, not whispers, evidence. But evidence cuts both ways. He tapped the phone. Your boss suspects. He's circling you, testing you. He's already begun whispering to the board that you're unstable, that you fabricated these recordings to cover your own mistakes. The words hit like a blade to the chest. Fabricated? The thought hadn't even crossed my mind. But the CEO leaned forward, his eyes hard. You've given me leverage, he said. But leverage without strategy is useless. If we move too soon, he'll bury us both under his lies. If we move too late, he'll bury the company. I swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. I want you to play the part of the victim. Act broken, defeated. Give him the illusion he's already won. He'll lower his guard, and when he does, he tapped the phone again. We strike. The weight of his words pressed into me, heavy and suffocating. He wanted me to be bait. When I left the building, the world outside felt different, like a stage. Every passerby an actor in a play I hadn't agreed to perform in. But before I could even catch my breath, my phone buzzed again. A message from my boss this time. We should meet again, tonight. My pulse spiked. He wasn't wasting time. I replied with a single word. Where? The answer came instantly. My office. After hours. Come alone. Every part of me screamed not to go, and yet deep down I knew I had no choice, because if I refused, he'd know I was hiding something. And if I went, I'd be walking straight into his trap. By nightfall, the building stood quiet, its windows dark except for one, the faint glow of his office waiting for me. My footsteps echoed against the marble floors as I approached, each step heavier than the last. When I pushed the door open, he was already there, leaning back in his chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Close the door, he said softly. I obeyed, my fingers brushing the wood as it clicked shut. The silence was suffocating. Then he leaned forward, his eyes sharp, cutting through the dim light. I know you've been talking to him, he whispered. I can smell it on you. The question is, how much have you told him? My throat tightened. Every word I said next could be the one that ended me. The silence in his office was thick, like smoke I couldn't escape. He leaned forward across the desk, his glass of whiskey untouched now, his eyes boring into mine. I asked you a question, he said quietly. How much have you told him? I forced my voice to stay calm. Nothing. He barely spoke to me. You saw how he looked at me yesterday. I was invisible to him. The words slipped out smooth, but inside my heart hammered against my ribs. He studied me, tilting his head slightly. That's funny, he murmured, because something about you doesn't look invisible anymore. You walk differently. Your eyes, they're not afraid like they used to be. You think you've got something on me, don't you? I froze, but only for a second. I think you're imagining things, I replied. But I knew from the flicker of his smirk that he had caught the hesitation. He rose slowly from his chair, circling the desk like a predator. Do you know what happens to people who try to cross me? He asked softly, almost conversationally. They disappear, quietly, neatly. Their names fade from office memory. Their resumes vanish into thin air. They spend years wondering how it all slipped away, until they finally break. My throat tightened, but I stood my ground. I'm not afraid of you, I whispered, even though fear coiled tight in my chest. He stopped in front of me, so close I could smell the sharp tang of his cologne. Oh, you should be, he said. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice until it was almost a hiss. Because I already know you're lying. You think the CEO is on your side? He's not. He's using you. And when he's done, he'll burn you the same way I will. The words sank into me like poison. But beneath the terror, a spark of defiance burned. Because he was right. At least about part of it. The CEO was using me, but what my boss didn't understand was that I was using them both. Before I could answer, he returned to his chair, taking a slow sip of whiskey, watching me the way a snake watches prey after striking. Leave, he said finally. But remember, one misstep and I won't just take your career. I'll take everything. I walked out of that office with my legs stiff and my hands trembling, but my mind sharper than ever. He was bluffing. He suspected, but he didn't know, not yet. And that meant I still had time. The moment I stepped into the night air, my phone buzzed again. A message from the CEO. Tomorrow, noon, my office, we act. My stomach twisted. There it was, the deadline. Tomorrow the trap would finally spring. But tonight I would sleep with the certainty that both men were circling me, waiting for me to make a mistake. And when morning came, I would find myself caught between them, forced to choose who to betray first. The city felt different that morning, like it was holding its breath. Every sound was sharper, every shadow deeper. I walked through the revolving doors of the building with the weight of the world, pressing on my shoulders, knowing that today would not end quietly. At exactly noon, I stood outside the CEO's private office. The receptionist didn't meet my eyes this time. She simply nodded, her expression pale, and motioned me in. The CEO sat behind his desk, the iPhone placed in front of him like a loaded gun. Beside it lay a sleek black folder, its edges sharp against the glass surface. Sit, he said, his voice calm, but there was no warmth in it. I obeyed, the chair beneath me cold, almost metallic. He opened the folder slowly, revealing printed transcripts of the recordings I had collected. Each page was marked, highlighted, annotated in his precise handwriting. "You've done well," he said finally. "You've given me everything I need." Relief flickered in me, brief, dangerous. But then his gaze lifted, steady and unblinking. "Understand something. This isn't about protecting you. This is about protecting my company. If you get caught in the crossfire, that's not my concern." His words struck harder than I expected. I had always known he was ruthless, but hearing it laid bare was something else entirely. Still, I nodded. "What do you want me to do?" He slid the phone toward me. "Your boss has arranged an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. He believes he's going to secure his future by painting you as unstable, as a saboteur. You will attend. You will sit quietly. You will let him speak. And when the moment is right," his hand tapped the phone, "I will play this." My breath caught. "In front of the board?" "In front of everyone," he confirmed. The plan was simple, brutal. Expose him in the most public, humiliating way possible. A perfect strike. But something inside me twisted. Because the CEO wasn't asking me to stand beside him, he was asking me to be bait. Again. Still, I agreed. What choice did I have? When I left the office, the hallway outside felt heavier, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. And waiting at the far end of that hallway, as if he had known exactly where I'd be, was my boss. His smile was sharp, but his eyes were cold. "Funny," he said, his voice smooth. "You still walk these halls like you belong here. Even after I fired you." I forced a neutral expression. "Old habits." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There's a board meeting this afternoon. You'll be there, of course. And when you are, I suggest you remember this. I don't lose." Not to the CEO, not to anyone. Certainly not to you. The way he said it, calm, certain, absolute, sent a chill down my spine. Because it wasn't just arrogance. It was confidence. Confidence born from knowing he had a plan of his own. That night, I sat in my apartment, unable to eat, unable to sleep. I replayed his words, his expression, the certainty in his tone, and a single thought gnawed at me. What if he already knew about the recordings? What if he had something bigger? Something that could turn everything against me? The clock ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2. I sat by the window, staring at the city lights, knowing dawn would drag me into a war I wasn't sure I could win. And when the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of fire and ash, I realized something. Tomorrow wasn't just about exposing him. It wasn't just about survival. It was about who would walk out of that boardroom still standing. And who wouldn't. The boardroom was a battlefield waiting to erupt. The long glass table gleamed under the recessed lights, its surface reflecting the nervous faces of directors already seated. Their hushed whispers cut through the silence, each one a shard of speculation. At the head of the table sat the CEO, stone-faced, immovable. And to his right my boss, smiling like a man who had already won. When I stepped into the room, every head turned. Whispers surged louder. My boss rose from his chair slowly, theatrically, as though welcoming me to a stage he controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice dripping with charm. "I invited her here today because it's time this company confronted a dangerous problem. Not from competitors, not from the market, from within." He let the words hang, savoring the ripple of unease. Then his gaze fixed on me and he continued. "This employee, once under my supervision, has shown repeated recklessness, disrupting meetings, undermining leadership, and most damningly attempting to embarrass us in front of our most valued partners. You may have heard about the incident with her phone, an act so unprofessional, so staged it nearly compromised our image before our CEO himself." The room buzzed. He was rewriting the story, turning a simple accident into a weapon, and for a moment, I felt myself shrinking beneath the weight of so many eyes. He leaned forward, his smile razor-sharp. "I have taken the liberty of documenting her instability, emails, witness accounts, patterns of behavior that show she is unfit for this company. Today, I propose we sever ties permanently before her actions cause irreparable harm." A director cleared his throat. "That's a serious accusation." Another frowned. "Do you have proof?" My boss slid a folder across the table, thick with papers. "All here, verified, irrefutable." My stomach turned, because I knew that folder wasn't truth. It was fabrication. And yet the board was already leaning forward, scanning the evidence he had so carefully planted. I felt the ground slipping beneath me. Until the CEO spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, but carried the weight of thunder. Enough. Every head snapped toward him. He didn't look at the folder. He didn't look at my boss. He looked at me. Stand, he ordered. I rose slowly, my legs trembling. Then he picked up the iPhone lying before him, its screen already glowing. Ladies and gentlemen, he said evenly, before you cast judgment, you deserve to hear something. He pressed play. The boardroom filled with a voice, my boss's voice, smooth at first, then dripping with malice. Plans to sabotage, manipulations, conversations, laced with contempt for the very people now seated before him. And finally, the damning confession, the scheme to frame me, the laughter about the phone. The room froze. The air thickened, suffocating. My boss's smile faltered. His color drained. No, this is out of context, he snapped. This is doctored. She must have... Silence, the CEO cut him off. One of the directors leaned back, eyes wide with disgust. You would plot against your own colleagues? Another shook his head. Unbelievable. My boss's hands trembled as he tried to gather the folder back, his once perfect composure unraveling. This is all a setup, he shouted. You can't trust her, you can't... But no one was listening anymore. The evidence was irrefutable. The truth was out. And for the first time, my boss looked small, fragile, defeated. The CEO closed the phone, the silence afterward louder than any scream. Pack your things, he told my boss coldly. You're finished here. No one argued. Not a single director came to his defense. As security escorted him out, his eyes met mine. And in them burned something darker than rage. A promise. This wasn't over. The meeting ended swiftly after that. Decisions signed. Orders given. When it was over, I stepped into the hallway, my body light with relief, yet heavy with dread. Because though I had survived the battle, I knew the war had only just begun. The meeting ended swiftly after that. Decisions signed. Orders given. When it was over, I stepped into the hallway, my body light with relief yet heavy with dread. Because though I had survived the battle, I knew the war had only just begun. This is Karma Unfolded, where every secret finds its reckoning. Don't forget to subscribe.